So in terms of blood cells, I have kind of little diagrams here of, oops, sorry, of the different types of blood cells. I'm just going to do a short thing about each of them. So you have red blood cells, you have white blood cells, of which there are two types that you should know for iGCSE, and then you have platelets. So red blood cells, their big job, and the reason I have pictures here is because you know I can't draw, so I can't draw this. Their big job is that they contain hemoglobin. And this hemoglobin, in order to make hemoglobin, this requires iron, which is good if they ever ask you why you need iron. Okay. And the hemoglobin um, basically carries oxygen. So it carries oxygen, right? So that's its job. The red blood cell it carries oxygen around the body. Now, in order to carry as much oxygen as possible, there are several things that are unique about its shape. All right. The first one is that it has a biconcave shape. Basically, it looks like a donut, but the hole in the middle isn't quite punched all the way through. So it's a biconcave shape. That's what it's called. And what that does is it increases the surface area. And it increases the surface area so that diffusion can occur faster in terms of gas exchange. Okay, so you have a biconcave shape that increases surface area. The other thing is you'll notice that it is missing a nucleus. It doesn't have a nucleus. Okay, so it has no nucleus. Why does it have no nucleus? Because that way it can fit more hemoglobin. All right, and because it has no nucleus, it cannot make new proteins or anything like that. So you don't need to know this for iGCSE, but the idea is that red blood cells generally only have a lifetime of about 90 days before they die out. So your body is constantly replenishing them. So it has no nucleus, so more hemoglobin can fit. Okay, I'm going to skip over here to the platelets because that's also fairly straightforward. Platelets also have no nucleus because they are basically cell fragments, okay? So they also have no nucleus. And what they do is they help the blood clot, which means basically, like if you get cut, right? The idea is that you get a scab, it stops you from bleeding, okay? So it helps the blood clot. That's literally all you need to know for iGCSE. You learn a lot more about them in A level. It helps the blood clot. And why do you want the blood to clot? Why is that important? It prevents you from losing too much blood. Oops, sorry. Prevents blood loss or too much blood loss. And also it acts as it stops pathogens from getting in, right? It's the same thing as your skin, right? Why do you have skin? So that pathogens don't get in and, travel around your body and have a field day. So it prevents blood loss and pathogen entry. Okay, so those are those two. Now the white blood cells, like I said, there's two types. Okay, you have phagocytes and you have lymphocytes. There. Okay. And for both of these, their job is basically to fight pathogens. Okay, so their function is that they um, fight pathogens or prevent infections. All right, the phagocytes do this in one way, and it's fairly straightforward. They engulf, so they basically surround, okay, and that a pathogen and take it into themselves, and then they basically release. They have sacks of digestive enzymes, and then those sacks of digestive enzymes bind or connect to the pathogen, and the pathogen gets broken down. So they engulf and digest pathogens, and that obviously kills the pathogen. Okay. Lymphocytes produce antibodies, and that if you're ever asked, like if you have a 2-point question about blood cells, right? The idea is that you want their name and then this is what they do. This is their basic function, all right? But sometimes you'll get a slightly more involved question about lymphocytes. So lymphocytes produce antibodies. Now, antibodies, what do those do? What they do is that they bind to pathogens and they basically neutralize them or inactivate them. So they prevent the pathogens from entering a new cell or being able to cause any damage. Okay, so they inactivate them. All right. And the reason that we talk about this, so if you talk about the immune response, you'll hear a lot of talk about antibodies. They bind to pathogens, but the way they do that is that they are specific. So each lymphocyte in your body produces a slightly different structure of antibody. Okay, think of it like an enzyme, where the enzyme is really specific. The antibodies are also specific to a certain pathogen, so they recognize certain pathogens, and they bind to the pathogens that they recognize. And what they actually are binding to are called antigens. So let me draw a bacterial cell. Okay, this is my little bacterial cell. And on this bacterial cell, it's going to have little things on its surface. This allows it to, um, get into cells, right? So these are the ideas that these are antigens. This is my bacteria. Not drawn to scale, guys, okay? So the idea is that these are antigens. And so what happens is the antibodies, they look like little Ys. They come in and they recognize this. They have on their, so this is an antibody. I should have put these in different colors. And so the idea is that the antibodies bind to antigens on the pathogen and inactivate them. So that's actually, so antigens can be considered a keyword. So antibodies, obviously a keyword. These are all keywords: engulf, digest. And then the antibodies. All right. So the antibodies bind to the antigens on the pathogen, and that way that's based. And so then the idea is that they can't use this to get into cells anymore, and instead there's just the antibody there. And eventually these can be marked for destruction or things like that, but you don't need to worry about that at A level or until A level. All right. So you have your bacteria that has antigens on it. And antigens also come up. This is also a keyword when we're talking about vaccines, right? The idea is that antigens are what are used to invoke an immune response, which means to create an immune response. So the antigens are in the shot that you get with a vaccine. And then your body creates antibodies against those antigens, so that if that bacteria or virus gets into your system, then you already have lymphocytes that produce antibodies against it. Yeah, so these are your basic types of blood cells.